The electric revolution is well underway, we all know that. And it also means that automakers who are well known for their internal combustion engine expertise have to jump on the bandwagon. One such automaker is Volkswagen, who we all know very well for their extremely popular and sturdy diesel engines. But they recently jumped on the electric bandwagon as well. First with the ID.4 a few years ago, and also recently they put on sale their first ever electric crossover to compete with the big dogs. This is the Volkswagen ID.4, and it's Volkswagen's first ever fully electric crossover SUV. And today, we're gonna find out everything about it. My name is Kor, you're watching Korrmotive, and this is the Volkswagen ID.4. So, let's start with an introduction on the ID.4. The ID.4 has actually been out for quite some time, but this is my first time getting behind the wheel of one. The ID.4 debuted a few years ago as Volkswagen's first ever electric crossover SUV, compact crossover SUV obviously, and it was the second car from Volkswagen to use their brand new MEB platform, which is a rear-wheel drive based electric car platform designed for dedicated battery electric vehicles. This particular ID.4 is a Pro Performance model, which means it's rear-wheel drive and it has the more powerful electric motor, as well as the larger battery pack, which we'll get back to in a moment. It's also finished in this really rather nice King's Red exterior color with a contrasting black roof. I'm not usually one for red cars myself, but the ID.4 looks really nice in this color. It's also great for video, as you can see. Let's talk a little bit about the ID.4's design. The first thing you need to know about it is that it's not as big as some pictures made it look. I know that I thought it was a big car when I first saw it in pictures, but it's really not that big. It's a compact crossover and it comes in at about 4.5 meters in length, which isn't too bad. Overall, I like the way the ID.4 looks. It's a Volkswagen for the modern electric era. It's a Volkswagen SUV for the modern electric era, and I think that's great. I like the color, even though I'm not one for red cars, as I said, and I like how the roof tapers off into the rear because of the aerodynamics, obviously, but it doesn't sacrifice too much on interior room, as I'll show you in a moment. So overall, excellent job on the design, VW. So let's talk about the ID.4's powertrain combinations. I would like to point out first of all that this is a European ID.4 because obviously we're in Europe, so there are some differences. There are two battery pack sizes for the ID.4, 58 kilowatt hours and 77 kilowatt hours, which is what this car has. And you can get a few different powertrain combinations in terms of output. For the Macedonian market, we're stuck between 170 horsepower and 204. This car has 204 horsepower, and it has a single rear-mounted electric motor. And this is the combo you want if you want to get the most range out of this car. According to the WLTP cycle, the ID.4 can top out at 522 kilometers of range, but in most driving situations with a full battery, I'd say expect more around 400 something kilometers, because before we filmed this video, I charged up the car to 100%, and factoring in my driving style, which is a lot like James May's driving style, the range computer said about 400 kilometers, which is entirely doable, just something to keep in mind. Another thing is, if you want all-wheel drive on the ID.4, you have to step up to the GTX, which is the more performance-focused version. I would just like to correct myself here. No, it's not true that you have to get the GTX model to get all-wheel drive. You can get the ID.4 with all-wheel drive regularly. It's just called the ID.4 4Motion, but those are the only two ways to have dual motors and all-wheel drive on the ID.4, at least in the Macedonian market. Apologies for the mistake. That still has the 77 kilowatt hour battery pack, but it adds another motor at the front for a total of around 300 horsepower. And if for the ID.5, the coupe version of this car, which I'll hopefully drive soon, you can only get the larger battery pack. And that's about all there is to know about the powertrain on the ID.4. And from what I've seen, this is the combo that you want. Now, because I'm back here, we might as well talk about the cargo area in the ID.4. Unfortunately, this one doesn't have an automatic tailgate release. You have to pay extra for it, but whatever, it's fine, it's not too heavy. In here we have 543 liters of cargo space, which is an excellent figure. If you fold down the rear seats, you can't do that from the cargo area, you have to go into the car. You get 1,655 liters of space. There's a couple cargo hooks and tie down points and what have you, and there's also a neat little spot down here. I can't show you right now because of all the stuff that's in the way, but there's a convenient little spot for the charge cable. So, what about charging? Well, the ID.4 does pretty well in this regard. On a regular 11 kilowatt charger, expect to charge the battery from empty to full in about 8.5 hours. The fastest charging rate you can get on the ID.4 is 118 kilowatts, and that will charge the battery from 10 to 80% in about 30 minutes. While we're on the topic of speed, 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in this model is 8.5 seconds, and the top speed is 160 kilometers per hour or 100 miles an hour, which is great. What about space in the back seats? Well, you'll be pleased to hear that the ID.4 does great. It's an electric car, which means that the wheelbase can be very long and there's no transmission and stuff here to intrude in your space. So let's have a look at this. I am 1.8 meters tall and approximately the size of a Discord admin. This seat is in my driving position. I have a whole lot of knee room, as you can see here, which is excellent. As for headroom, it's decent. The seats are arranged in a stadium setup, so the rear bench is actually a little bit higher than the front seats are, but also that means that you can slide your feet underneath because these seats are a little bit raised up. There's a small storage pocket here. You also have a couple of USB-C ports down there and your own climate vents and the ID logo here on the bottom. Generally speaking, the back seat room in the ID.4 is great. If you have a taller person back here, they might struggle a little bit with headroom, but it's really not too bad. There's so much knee room, they can just do this, no problem. And the middle seat is not too bad either, considering that the floor is flat. I have decent room in here. It's really not too bad at all. So overall, as for the rear seats, they did a fantastic job here. And now we jump to the front of the ID.4, where we have a very simplistic and minimalistic interior. First up, we have the steering wheel, which is the familiar steering wheel design that is appearing on a lot of Volkswagen models now, with the capacitive touch controls. We'll get back to that in a second. And in the middle, you have the horn, which sounds like this. Then we have this tiny little 5.3-inch display in front of the driver, which shows you all of the essential information that you might need to know. It can show your adaptive cruise control following distance, the lane keep assist system, and your efficiency detail, so how much electricity you've been consuming and how much range is left, obviously, in the charge of the battery. Right here we have the gear selector, which is a little strange. It's a rocker switch that you twist forwards and backwards. Interestingly, while you do have a starter button up here, you don't really need one. If the car detects the key, you just get in the car, you put your foot on the brakes, put it in drive, and away you go. And when you put it in park and open the door, it shuts off. In the middle, we have the infotainment system. It's important to point out that all versions of the ID.4 use the same infotainment system software. It's just a matter of screen size. This one is 10 inches, but you can also get 12 inches. Both screens are really high res. It's really easy to see. Below that, you have a bunch of capacitive touch controls. Again, we'll come back to that. Other than this whole interesting minimalistic setup, it feels just like a Volkswagen. And as a Volkswagen owner, I can vouch for this. The steering wheel stalks are very similar. The way that all the controls are named is very easy to figure out. And overall, it's just a fairly typical Volkswagen interior, just more like an electric car. So now it's time to finally discuss the elephant in the room, the infotainment system. When this car first came out, and this includes the ID.3 as well, there were complaints up the ass about the infotainment system responsiveness and its intuitiveness. I was expecting it to be really bad, but I'm guessing that this car has a software update. I haven't asked, I'm not sure, but it feels a lot faster and a lot smoother than they did at first. It's actually fairly responsive and pretty easy to use. The system layout itself is very intuitive, and it's a lot more responsive than it was when the ID.4 first came out. On the other hand, I still wish that the AC controls were separate buttons and dials, because you have to slide your finger across this little pad here to change the temperature. it doesn't respond all the time. Whereas the audio controls on the steering wheel, again, and the cruise controls on the other side, again, nowhere near as annoying as I thought they were going to be. They are a little bit strange and there is a risk that you can hit them by accident, but once you start using them, you kind of do get used to them eventually, and it's really not too bad. One thing I did find a little bit of a chore to use was the touch-sensitive defroster and light controls here on the left side of the steering wheel. You can hit some of them by accident even if you didn't mean to, but again, it's just something that you kind of get used to, and it's really not too bad once you have figured out the kinks. Moving on from that, each seat has its individual armrest that is fully adjustable, as you can see. We have 2 cup holders right here. Inside this tray, we have some extra storage and a wireless charger for your phone. Obviously, this car gets dual zone climate control. There's a smart climate mode. There's also an air care mode that filters the air coming into the cabin. There's a heated steering wheel. There's 3-stage heated seats, 3-stage heating for the steering wheel as well, by the way. And this car also has most of the advanced safety features. We have adaptive cruise control. We have lane keep assist, lane departure warning, rear parking sensors, front parking sensors. We also have a park assist system, which doesn't work in Macedonia. Obviously, nothing works here. But it has most of the safety features you'd expect. There are a few missing ones, like the heads-up display and stuff like that, but everything that you might need and a little bit more that you might not need, but is nice to have as well. One final complaint I have about the interior is the use of piano black plastic is a little bit excessive, especially on the steering wheel buttons, but generally, I like the interior, and being a Volkswagen, of course, it's all very solid and very well put together. One last thing I want to show you before we start driving the ID.4 is the smartphone app. So I downloaded the app for the purposes of this video, and as you can see, it offers you a fairly useful lineup of features. You can check the range of the car, and you can also check how far along it is with charging. And my favorite feature, and in fact all my passengers' favorite feature, you can precondition the climate control to warm up the interior or cool it down, which was very useful during the time that I had the ID.4 because it was really freaking cold. You also have the ability to see your service partner, and it can show you charging stations nearby from where you are if you allow it to use your location, and it's overall great. The only thing I noticed is, which is a little bit of a shame, is that it doesn't tell you if someone triggered the alarm, and I should know because I triggered the alarm by accident. But other than that, it's a great little smartphone app that allows you to check on the ID.4 or precondition the climate control, and it also allows for Apple CarPlay to be wireless. So, what's the ID.4 like on the road? The answer is excellent. This is an electric car and it feels right at home on the road in the city. And in the city, the ID.4 does very, very well. It's very quiet for one thing, being an electric car, there isn't really that much noise, so it's very quiet, very relaxed. It responds immediately to the throttle, again, being an electric car, and it certainly feels a lot faster than the 8.5 seconds time to 100 kilometers per hour suggests. Let's talk a little bit about the drive modes. Now, like every electric car, the ID.4 has regenerative braking, and you're encouraged to use that mode as much as possible to allow for one-pedal driving, and the ID.4 does great with that as well. You do need to apply the brakes once in order to come to a stop completely, but other than that, you can pretty much just do one-pedal driving, and it preserves your electric power quite well. I'd like to also talk about the audio system in the ID.4 because it's fantastic. Very bassy, very clear, and it is really a joy to drive this car around town because it feels right at home. Not that it doesn't feel at home on the highway, because on the highway the ID.4 is very competent. It accelerates very quickly, it gets up to speed very easily. The adaptive cruise control is a great feature. There is a little bit of wind noise at highway speeds and road noise, obviously, but that's pretty much unavoidable. But other than that, the ID.4 is very serene and quiet even on the highway, which is great. So you're probably wondering about electricity consumption. Well, according to the trip computer here, since the start of today's journey, I have averaged 24.9 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. The lowest I've gotten it to is about 18, but that's driving very slowly and also having the heating turned off entirely. But overall, the ID.4 does great with range as well. The battery is currently at 60%, and the car says that there's 236 kilometers of driving left. So, what about handling? Well, I'm delighted to say that the ID.4 handles quite well. I should point out that this is not the GTX model with more power. It's just a regular ID.4 and it's on 19-inch wheels, which means Meteor tires. But it does have this nice little spark to it, I guess. It's rear-wheel drive, so you get this sensation that you're being pushed out of the corners rather than being pulled away from them, and it's nice. It's very flat, obviously. It's an electric car. It has a pretty low center of gravity. The lane keep assist system is going a little crazy right now, but it does hold quite well on a mountain road. It doesn't really encourage you to drive it enthusiastically. It's more a comfort-focused vehicle. I mean, if you do, give it the beans out of a corner, it does handle itself surprisingly well, as I am now demonstrating here. It's really good. But again, this is a more comfort-focused vehicle, and it's quite good at that also. It has a pretty supple ride. Some bumps at lower speeds kind of upset this car sometimes, from what I've noticed, but it's really not too bad. It's actually quite good, especially considering that this is the car with 19-inch wheels. It's a little bit more supple than, say, the version with 21-inch wheels might be. And it's also pretty fun, even though I'm currently in eco mode, just to preserve the charge as much as possible. I'm just gonna gun it out of this corner. On a twisty road like this, the ID.4 is surprisingly good and surprisingly competent. Another thing I really like about the ID.4 is that there really isn't any sort of learning curve because this is an electric car. It's a little bit different than your standard gasoline car, obviously. It accelerates a lot faster, there's a lot less noise, But other than that, really, there's not a whole lot to say in terms of adjusting to the fact that this is an electric car. It's actually pretty simple. It's a Volkswagen that happens to be electric. The only thing I found a little confusing is the shifter, because you have to go down to change into reverse and twist it forwards to go into drive. Usually it's the other way around. But there's not really that much of a learning curve with the ID.4. It's very easy to just get into and go. And Volkswagen has always been good at that. I can confirm as somebody who owns a Volkswagen, so good job on that one. So overall, the ID.4 does a fantastic job on the road. No matter which environment you throw at it, it can hold its own on a twisty road, and it's surprisingly fun. It can hold its own on the highway, and it accelerates with a good bit of gusto. And it's a fantastic car for the city as well. So overall... So ladies and gentlemen, that is the Volkswagen ID.4. A very, very pleasant surprise. Volkswagen is a little late to the EV game, but they're showing that they can do it properly, and the ID.4 is proof of that. The ID.4 gets a score of 8 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, be sure to hit like and subscribe to the channel. Also follow me on social media. There will be links in the description, and I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.